Howdy! We're about halfway through the semester and we're going to talk about Chapter 5. And this is one of the most important chapters we can talk about. And it's a long chapter and you're just going to have to stick with me. If you are not reading, you need to read, and you especially need to read this chapter. It's a special concern if you're a computer science major or someone interested in software and you think about doing reverse engineering or something like that. Now I'm breaking this up into 3 videos, but the objective for Chapter 5, and like I said, it is a very long chapter. Oh my gosh. About 80-90 pages. Even though the book, the author does not mention hacking back, I want you to know what hacking back is. Why? Because, first of all, you're in this field and you have an interest. Second of all, there is proposed legislation before Congress now to make hacking back legal. It is currently illegal in the United States. And there's various formats of the bill going through. It was introduced, reintroduced. So you need to know about it. We're going to talk about some of these: CFAA, DMCA, CISA, which is part of the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act, the Economic Espionage Act, and other laws to protect intellectual property as they relate to cybersecurity. I want you to be able to summarize these laws: intent, penalties, who can bring an action. Some of these laws, government or private parties, civil or criminal, the defense, the damages, a good summary of the law. And to have fun, I want you to be able to defend or criticize hacking back. So if I take half the class and say, defend it, and the other half and say, tell me why it's wrong. Same thing with these laws. Defend them. Why do we need them? What's right about them? And then criticize. And you might say, but I like this law. I don't want to criticize it. Well, there's an old adage that if you're a lawyer, you need to be able to argue both sides. And you're trained to do this in law school. You're going to argue for this certain individual, and then you're going to turn around and you're going to argue against a certain individual. There's also an old adage that if you only have time to prepare one case, prepare the case for your opponent. So even if you think, hey, I like this law, I want to defend it, by you criticizing the law, you will go through some analysis and you will learn more about the law. And maybe I should go down instead of up. So here's how you want to navigate Chapter 5. You want to, that's supposed to say important in a long chapter, not a log chapter. You want to talk about hacking back. I've put some additional reading out there for you. It's a hot topic in the United States. Hacking back sounds nefarious, so sometimes people say active defense. And it leads to a question: when does defending systems put you on the offense? You know, there's an old adage again, the best defense is a great offense. Well, when do you cross that line? There are many technologies that we know are strictly defense. And there are many technologies that we know that are strictly being on the offense, or active defense if you'd like. But there's this huge gray area. Some things that some people consider good defense, other people say, no, it's offensive, it should be illegal, and vice versa. So hacking back is first mentioned way back in your book on page 196. I don't even think it appears in your table of contents, and it's talked about as a reference to active defense. Now, how do you navigate this chapter? This is one chapter you're going to want to read. If you're a software engineer, you're going to want to pay particular importance to those laws that might catch you when you're reverse engineering or hacking back. And note also, as we talk about this, this is emerging case law, so there's no good definitive legal answer. There's a split in the circuits. I'm not interested in the section on state trade secrets law because the federal law trumps that. You see more actions under federal law. For a long time, we didn't have a good Espionage Act based on the Uniform Trade Secrets Act. We do now. Most of the state actions limit you to civil, whereas the Espionage Act has some real teeth to it. All right, so I've split this into 3 videos. An introduction to CFAA, which is huge, DMCA, Economic Espionage Act. And before we go there, there was an important Supreme Court case this week that was resolved. sometime on your own initiative, go Google Carpenter v. the United States. We will talk more about this case when we get into privacy, but you want to be following this. Now, I could go look at the opinion itself. Let's see what a Supreme Court opinion looks like. Yeah, it doesn't look real enticing to read. It's only 119 pages. Even when you're in law school and read your case books, typically for each class, 50 pages between each class session. They extrapolate out what you need to know. But I myself have not had time to read this. But then there's some good sources, always be aware of your sources, that talk about this and why this is an important case. So spend some time. All I did was Google Carpenter v. U.S. This is hot news. This is the kind of stuff that, like I said, Supreme Court precedent can be changed overnight. Now, saying that, the caveat is they did not overthrow precedent. They only overthrew a little bit of precedent. It is a very narrow opinion, and Justice Roberts, there's a 5-4 decision, by the way, just it's exactly what you'd think. 4 liberals voted for Carpenter, 4 conservatives voted for the United States. The deciding vote was our Chief Justice, Roberts, who wrote the opinion, and his opinion does state this is only to be interpreted on cell phone data. So it's a narrow opinion. Okay, so let's go on with this. We're going to talk about these. I'm mentioning the Privacy Act of 1974. I do not know why it is not listed. It's not only not in this chapter, it's not really even in this book. And so just be aware of it. We're going to talk about the CFAA, CISA. CISA will probably be more along with our GDPR. I'll mention it. But CISA is part of the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act. DMCA is a big one you need to know about, and the Economic Espionage Act. Okay, so let's put this back up a little bit. Most of you are in computer science, or you're in technology, or even if you're in business or the Bush School or something, you still want to think about this in terms of technology. And we do reverse engineering, and many times we can do reverse engineering legally. I do a guest lecture on this, the reverse engineering class here at Texas A&M. And now we're getting to something called hacking back. And under the U.S. law, you can be prosecuted under the CFAA, the DMCA, the Trade Secrets Act, patent law, state contract, state trade secrets law, etc., and now EU law for reverse engineering or hacking back. Now, I could teach a whole semester on just this, so we're just going to make highlights. If you're going to run afoul of the law in looking at what is reverse engineering or hacking back, or having to look into software code that is the intellectual property of others, these are the typical laws you need to know you might run afoul of. For instance, at the CFAA, there's a prosecution a few years ago against Aaron Schwartz. It was draconian, in my opinion. Mr. Schwartz was offered a plea bargain. He did not accept it. He made a counteroffer. The feds did not accept it. He could have gone to prison for decades. He could have had all these bad things happen to him. And he committed suicide. If you're not familiar with Aaron Schwartz, that's another you're going to want to do some time Googling. So let's start with CFAA. If you really want to have some fun, go look up the 1983 movie War Games. I thought it was goofy when I saw it. I still think it's goofy, made goofier over time. But the movie came out, it was a big hit in 1984, and it's about a kid, Matthew Broderick, when he's much younger, who starts playing on a machine, and when it says, do you want to play a game? He's like, yeah, let's play thermonuclear destruction. Now let's think about this. 1983, we're in the middle of the Cold War. Our enemy was the Soviet Union. What happens is the computer, he thinks he's playing a game and puts certain things. He's going to be Russia, and he's going to blow up think it's Las Vegas, Seattle, I can't remember, and he realizes too late that the machine itself is actually not playing a video game. They're going to react and defend. It's not the first movie that was done like this, but this movie literally made people in Congress say, oh my gosh, you mean this could happen? So they passed, believe it or not, CFAA, and it's a law that makes illegal access without authorization or exceeding authorized access. And it's a typical law out of Congress. It's not well defined. It doesn't give us good definitions for authorization. When it talks about exceeding authorized access, it's confusing. Now, interestingly enough, it does have a legal definition of computer and protected computer, which relies on certain types of computers in finance or government that have been used in court decisions. Failing anything else, someone will pull out the statute and say, what defines a computer? All right. Let's go to this link. If I can get it up. And this is the definition of computer. So remember, when we look at a law, 18 U.S. Code Section 1030, fraud and related activity in connection with computers. Whoever having knowingly access to computer without authorization or exceeding authorized access, and by means of such conduct, determined by the United States government but pursuing to an executive order or statute. We have to worry about, if our good president gets up tomorrow and puts out an executive order, that this may change the understanding of this law. It mentions the Atomic Energy Act. You see that a lot. You got to remember when it was originally written, 1983. We were all in a big race to blow up the world. So it intentionally accesses the computer without authorization or exceeds this, and thereby obtains information on a financial institution, something about a credit agency, any department or agency of the United States, or information about a protected computer. Now, I'm not going to go all the way through this, but you should be aware of how laws look. And by the way, this Legal Information Institute is just an excellent site for this. It's done by Cornell University, and you can see on the right here, if you need a lawyer, you get all these kind of great ads for, you want personal injury, real estate, employment, immigration law, whatever. But this is the basis of CFAA. Pretty easy to read. Talks about different ways of offense, if it's going to be criminal or civil. Okay, let's go back. And, oh yes, as used in this, Section E1, the term computer means an electronic, magnetic, optical, electrochemical, or other high-speed data processing device. You can read this. I dare say that if I said to each of you 5 minutes ago, give me a definition of a computer, this is what you would have come up with. But it is our statutory definition. Statutory means it is in a statute. And this is a federal statute, so I can refer to this. If I'm in a court opinion and people are talking about, is that a computer? If it's not a computer, is this a computer? Is that not a computer? I can go back and say, well, is it one of these? Electronic, magnetic, optical, Does it perform logical, arithmetic, or storage function? Does it include a data storage facility? Check. Yes, it's a computer, or no, it's not a computer. And for the protected computer, it's for the use of a financial institution and or United States government, and affects foreign commerce or communication. Remember, we can always take federal law if it has interstate or international commerce. So it gives us this definition, originally passed in 1984, amended several times. Okay? All right. So criminally, who can investigate? Typically, it's the FBI or the Secret Service. And people wonder why the Secret Service. You have to remember the Secret Service is out of the Treasury Department. So anything that has to do with the Treasury, finances, and the like comes out of there. It allows for both criminal and civil actions. And if you look at this in your book, I want to highlight a few things. On page 161, the top, it makes a note. In other words, increased penalties for white-collar crime will result in significant economic benefits for society by reducing white-collar crime. That's a long way of saying one of our motivations for law is to protect society, and so we call that this is in the interest of public policy. This is good public policy to reduce white-collar crime. So here's a motivation for the law. Okay? So the committee that did this, the Judiciary Committee, was basically concerned with what was being known as hacking. Now, go back in the Wayback Machine and think about 1984. I was working in the industry at that time. In fact, that's the year I came to Texas A&M and started my PhD. PCs had come out. They were very expensive compared to today. They were very limited compared to today, but we still did most of our work on mainframes and mini computers that were in computer rooms. We didn't have the bring your own device. We didn't have the dynamic networks. If somebody wanted to put a machine on the network, the sysadmin would have to come in and do that. So it was a different time. And so when we talk about hacking, then Congress was concerned about it, but we have evolved that definition since that time. Okay? So in 1984, passed the CFAA. I guess the whole name is Counterfeit Access Device and Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's known as CFAA. Creates felonies and misdemeanors for certain kind of violations. It's been amended 6 times. It has 7. Let's see if that's in my next slide. Nope. Let's see where that is. It has 7 sections: hacking to commit espionage, hacking to commit information, obtain information, hacking a federal government computer, hacking to commit fraud, to commit damage, trafficking in passwords, threat of hacking, and the like. So it has 7 sections, and here's the problem. When it defines this illegal to intentionally access a computer without authorization and excess of authorization, it never kind of explains what that is. What is without authorization? What does that mean? So as you're sitting there hearing me, I know what you're going to be thinking, or I hope what you're thinking is, if we don't have a good definition in the law, what do? And we go to the courts. The courts are going to interpret this. So what is a computer? There's your legal definition, 18 U.S.C., United States Code, Section 1030E1, and protected computer. So we don't have a good definition for without authorization or excess. It's confusing, but we've got a definition of what a computer is, and we have a definition of protected computer. Now, the CFAA is something you want to be monitoring because, yes, you're right, the Senate currently has a bill called ACDC, right, for CFAA, Active Cyber Defense Certainty Act, that would allow hacking back. My personal opinion is not a good idea. And not a good idea for a lot of reasons. One, I think you're the one hacking me, so I hack back. It's kind of like we live in Texas, and we can castle doctrine. We can defend ourselves. We can defend our home. Somebody breaks in. We have rights. Some states don't have a liberal law like that. Some states, and by liberal I mean not liberal in the political sense, but liberal in what you can do to somebody who breaks into your house. Some states have, you have to seek safety first, and you're only allowed to defend yourself if you can't seek safety, da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay. Well, let's think about hacking back with that. If we're thinking of hacking back, I'm being attacked. What is legal for me to do to protect myself? How am I allowed to go back against the attacker? First big problem is attribution. I think it's you hacking me. I hack back. I attack you. I plant malware. I destroy your data. I disrupt your operations. I'm just in there doing things. It turns out it's not really you. Someone's spoofing, and I have now pretty much destroyed you. That's one big problem, attribution. Second big problem is, who are the attackers? If we are being attacked by an entity or an individual, rules of law apply. If you're being attacked by a nation state, that is rules of engagement, aka rules of war. I'm trying to figure out who I'm being attacked by, and I put into effect certain processes to attack back, but it turns out, again, I don't really know. Is it an individual? Is it a nation state? different rules apply. If I'm an individual, do I want to start attacking a nation state? Probably not a good idea. Okay, so you have the problem of attribution of which laws apply. And then you have a third problem with you might end up causing a much bigger fight than you ever intended. You think you're going after somebody, and it turns out it's China or it's Russia, and suddenly the fight is way beyond the original victim. So, for a lot of reasons, I don't like hacking back. I think it's like, weaponizing kids on a playground. Bad things are going to happen, So, but watch this, because it gets introduced, and this is not just in this administration. There was a lot of cybersecurity laws that went into effect under President Obama that people considered a risk for privacy in the name of security. This is a law that has made a comeback. It's currently in committee. It'll get passed around. You'll hear, commentary on it and the like. Okay, so here's why this is important. And I don't think these are in your book. Let's say, what's a computer? So there was a case in 2011 where a person was using a computer for sexting underage girls. And he was brought into the CFAA. Now, this was 2011, this is 2018. In 7 years, we have gotten more laws in place against sexting and cyberbullying and the like, but in 2011, we didn't have so many laws. So they find this guy, and they prosecute him under CFAA, and he appeals, takes it to the 8th Circuit, and says, hey, CFAA says this has to be against a computer, and I was sexting on a cell phone, and we all know a cell phone is not a computer. And so the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit found that a cell phone is a computer if the phone performs arithmetical, logic, and storage functions, and basically this decision paved the way for harsher consequences for criminals, basically making a criminal offense engaging with minors over cell phones. On the other side, and this is kind of a funny case, I always think it should be a movie, Dumber and Dumber version 3, 2 guys found a software bug in a poker machine, and so they made like $400,000 because if you ran hands at a certain sequence, I can't remember the whole details, but all of a sudden the payout would pay you out as if your last 10 hands won. Well, these 2 guys, they're in New Jersey. They get a couple of casinos. It's a software bug. They figure it out, and they make $400,000. And an overzealous federal prosecutor says, "Hey, we're going to prosecute you under the CFAA." So what happens? Nope. Poker machines are not computers under the statute. It's not connected to the internet. You're not performing this and this and this. So the court said, no, find another law to get these guys. They tried. I think they tried a wiretap law, which is a misnamed law, but the wiretap law. And I think finally they said, is this prosecution really worth it? I mentioned Aaron Swartz. He created, I believe, if I have the facts straight, a bogus account. I think he actually created an account under his own name. But he went to MIT and he downloaded some Jaster academic papers like, woohoo, that's a big thing to steal. He was prosecuted. He could have received $1 million in fines, 35 years in federal prison, asset forfeiture, restitution, supervised release. Like I said, they made an offer to him. He did not accept it. He countered. They declined. They were getting ready to go to trial, and he committed suicide. The sad thing about this case is I've been told that because of HIPAA privacy, his doctor realized he was at risk for suicide, but because of HIPAA, couldn't call the prosecutors and say, is this really worth it? The prosecutor who prosecuted this, I believe, has retired, along with the ACDC modifications proposed to CFAA. Every year something called Aaron's Law is introduced into Congress and goes nowhere, saying, this is not what CFAA was designed for. And in my opinion, it was not. It was total overreach by a federal prosecutor. Most of the time I'm on the side of the feds. Most of the time I'm the person saying there ought to be more federal indictments or something. But in this case, I think it was overreach. And in fact, at one point, MIT even said, hey, we don't care. We don't care. We don't want this. Let it go away. There's other ways you could have gotten these academic journal articles. Now, the CFAA has 3 types of violations. Code-based, which is the one, and I'm putting the other 2 in red because no one argues code-based. You circumvent computer code, clearly falls under CFAA. I break encryption, I get your password, I do something, I circumvent it. Nope, no argument. The other 2, again, there's a split in courts. Contract-based, every time, you get on something on the internet and say, do you accept? And you say, yeah, I accept. How many of us read that 10-page thing? End-user license agreement, terms of service, whatever you want to call it, acceptable use policy. There's a disagreement in the courts if this falls under CFAA. Because you're basically contracting. You say in this contract, you're going to do this and this and this, and you didn't do it, so can we prosecute you under CFAA? The third one is a very odd one, I think, because it's what's called norms-based, and it's basically contrary to societal expectations, which I kind of always love that because, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, and I've seen a lot of changes in society expectations, in the last 30, 40 years, and, it's a gray area. Our society today is different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So this is always one, whenever it says contrary to societal expectations, that's a moving target. That basically says, hey, if I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to claim that society expects something different. So there's a split in the courts. Now, I've talked about the circuits, and I go back to that map, and I should have included in the slides. Go back to that map. Where's the 9th Circuit? Okay, 9th Circuit is California, Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii. The big one is California. You're going to see cases coming out of there. They're in San Francisco, typically very liberal. There's always been a liberal appellate court. However, you're also going to know they're in California, and they are very much influenced by Silicon Valley. So they have ruled that an individual is liable only if the initial access was not permitted. This makes some strange conclusions, as you'll see when you read the book. So I'm an employee, and I've been an employee for a while, and then I go and steal stuff, and they'll be like, no, that's not CFAA because my initial access was permitted. I can be prosecuted under other things, so it's not like I'm going to skate out. The 1st and the 5th Circuit's much broader. When it says broad reading of exceeds authorized access, it considers all 3, code, contract, norms. And again, geographically, you want to look at where the 1st and the 5th are. We're in the 5th Circuit. Why does this come out this way? But the important part for you to get at this point is to remember that federal law can be interpreted differently depending on which state you're in, depending on which federal circuit you're in when it goes to the appellate. In Texas, we're in the 5th out of New Orleans. 9th, California. 3rd, Delaware. So you got to split. And that's why I'm saying in the beginning of this, when I say there's no definitive, this law's been around since 1984, and we're constantly changing it, and the court's interpreting it, and we still don't have what we like to call clear black letter law. Black letter law means you do this. It's like a code statement. If this, then this, no discretion. So, ignore the dog barking. Shh. So, what can happen? You can have criminal. You can have asset forfeiture, long prison terms, and big fines, as we saw with Aaron Schwartz, or we can have civil actions. Now, there's some more I'm going to say about CFAA in a bit as we go through this. I want you to read the chapter. I'm going to move on to video 2 and video 3. Stay tuned.